Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage the president of GMF, Ms. Heather Conley.
Hi, thanks, Henry. Hi, everybody. Steve, we're almost close to the finish line. Hang in there, hang in there. We are about to have both very important breaking news and a very important conversation. I want to first bring in Congressman Lloyd Doggett, who's going to come in on the screen here in a second. When he does, he will be joined by Ambassador Imants, Lieģis, who's an advisor to the Latvian defense minister, a former Latvian defense minister, as well as ambassador to NATO for Latvia, and Steve Biegun, who is Senior Vice President for Global Public Policy at the Boeing Corporation, former Deputy Secretary of State, and a GMF trustee. So, Steve, welcome. Congressman Doggett, welcome. I am going to let you tell everybody here in Brussels Forum that a very important vote just happened. Can you give us the breaking news, sir? Whoop, you're not. Wait, we got. Hold on one second. We're going to get you up on volume here.
There we go, I think.
There you are.
Thank you, Heather. Finally, after so long, we've got some good news from Washington. Just a few minutes ago, the House, by an overwhelming vote of 311 to 94, with majorities of both Democrats and Republicans, voted to move forward with debate, approve the rule. We will now have debate beginning on all four bills, including Ukraine, tomorrow morning at 9 Eastern. We expect votes tomorrow afternoon. The Senate is still in session on an unrelated bill, and I think there is a good chance they will stay in session and give us a chance to get this long overdue relief to Ukraine that we've struggled on for so long. It's a hopeful development.
Well, Congressman Doggett, thank you. Woo! That is the very best news. And I think just to tell our audience here, in many ways that vote is really a proxy vote for the main vote on the four bills, right? I mean, you're very confident. We can't, no guarantees, but you're very confident that incredible bipartisanship will carry through for this vote, yes?
I think the votes on each of the four bills will be different. There's Ukraine, there is Israel, there is a vote concerning the Repo Act that's also important to Ukraine. But these votes will eventually, I think all bills will pass and eventually be merged into one, which will be sent over to the Senate. So I'm confident that there's a majority in the House to approve Ukraine aid. I believe it will be done tomorrow and that the Senate can act shortly thereafter.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Well, that was not going to be the conversation of this panel, but thank you for bringing our breaking news. What we want to focus on is the absolutely critical importance of increasing both American and European industrial defense production. And we know that the need is great. The ammunition alone, daily, hourly, that Ukraine is using is an incredible rate. It goes back to 1943, those types of levels. But yet our production isn't quite there. And so we wanted to start, and maybe Congressman, I'm going to start with you. As a Democrat from Texas, Austin is a very important source. We know the Army software factory is there. In fact, we brought some European parliamentarians to Austin to focus on some of how we can work together on tech. You've been a strong proponent about increasing America's defense production to meet this moment. Help us understand what needs to be done. What does the Biden administration need to do to increase our capacity to provide the capabilities to both our Ukrainian partners as well as our NATO allies?
Well, I'm so pleased that the German Marshall Fund brought a delegation of European parliamentarians to my hometown of Austin recently. And I think some of the groups that you met with there really demonstrate the potential for the future. The Army Futures Command is there in Austin. They're expanding. They're very much about innovation. They actually share the building I have my office in. but you wouldn't know it was Army most of the time because most of the Army folks are in civilian dress. They're interacting with many tech entrepreneurs. They're looking at all aspects of the future, how we prepare for future warfare. And then another thing they've done is to open the Army Software Factory, which I believe you saw, considering a wide range of issues. The day I was there, they were dealing with everything from how to get weapons more rapidly to Ukraine to how to deal with issues concerning discrimination against women and on a gender basis in the military. Also very linked to them is the Capital Factory Center for Defense Innovation. This is a real public-private partnership that's looking at DoD dual-use innovation. Again, it involves many of the startups that have been so vital there in Austin, and it includes nearby Fort Hood and some of the action that takes place. And then I think the other thing that's so important that I was a part of earlier this week, we had the Commerce Secretary there and the CHIPS Act in action. Samsung will have a huge additional set of fabs that are being constructed right now just outside of Austin. They're going to 2 nanometer in the top line chips. These will be so important to our national security and giving us national security that is not subject to the possibility of an earthquake or a challenge from the PRC in Taiwan. So diversifying that base. So I believe that what we've done through the CHIPS and Science Act is a really important step forward. I know it caused some initial anguish in Europe, and we need better cooperation on these issues with our European allies, but it's a step in the right direction.
Steve, let me turn to you. There is enormous need, but there's a challenge on production. And Boeing, other major U.S. Military companies are trying to meet that need. What are the challenges, and how do we overcome those obstacles?
So Ukraine has been a great teachable moment for all of us. It's been, I don't mean to any way minimize the tragedy of this Russian invasion and the terrible consequences for Ukraine, but it's been a great learning lab for us for some of the muscle memory we lost in terms of defense production and deploying our resources. And that's both for the government and the strategists as well as for the industry. And we've learned that our industries had atrophied. We learned that we had minimized the stuff that we needed to produce for a ground war. We thought the era of tanks and artillery duels were over, and it was a abrupt reminder that form of war still very much is real. But we also have adapted very quickly, and we've learned some lessons on how to move much more quickly. And we've also learned how to move with less cost. Ukrainians have taught us a lot in that respect, but some of it has been modernizing and modifying existing munitions. So in terms of increasing the speed, a good case study would be a munition that was an artillery system that was delivered by Boeing and Saab in a U.S.-European consortium to the Ukrainians in January. It was an object of the highest attention in the government. The Secretary of Defense called the CEO of our company and asked us to prioritize this. We committed to do it in 9 months, an unheard of timetable. The Department of Defense waived a lot of procurement regulation to expedite the process and put the money up front to allow us to have the confidence to deliver the system. Saab built the launcher and the vehicle. Boeing built the firing device and the munitions. We brought it all together in 9 months and delivered to the Ukrainians, and they're using it on the battlefield today. That system was a modification of the small diameter bomb, which is an aerial munition that's used by aircraft, converted to a ground launch capacity and fires from a tube and can be fired out of a HIMARS tube. And so that's kind of innovative, fast, and industry government support that can produce the outcomes that we're going to need to be able to respond to the threat that we face now.
We feel the need for transatlantic speed. That's a perfect example of that. And Ambassador, I want to turn to you because there is this need for the short term. We have a problem right now. The Latvian government, in a very creative move with the UK created a drone coalition. So again, when we can't produce it enough, how can we quickly turn to that? Could you share with our audience the genesis of that and what has it meant for providing Ukraine urgently needed capabilities?
Thanks very much, Heather. First of all, Congressman, I'd like to congratulate you for the decision given in the breaking news and wish you good luck in tomorrow's vote, because this is crucial not only for Ukraine, but it's also crucial for Latvia and other frontline states of NATO. So we're very much looking forward to this decision. As advisor to the minister, he's already getting his response lined up in the hope that it'll be a favourable vote. So on the question of the idea that Latvia had to initiate a drone coalition amongst the Ramstein group, which is the group of 50 countries supporting Ukraine. So in the drone coalition, we also have, apart from the lead by the United Kingdom, and the focus on the needs of Ukraine itself, so it's very result-orientated. We have other countries such as Poland, we even have Australia participating in it. So this is a coalition of about 10 countries, and the idea is to really focus on the urgency of providing, in the first instance, what are called first-person view drones. These are the ones that can be produced fairly quickly. They're the type of kamikaze drones that are for one purpose use. But at the same time, we are also engaging our partners to look at the long term, because we have the very short term and urgent need because of the Russia's war against Ukraine, and then we have the longer term where we see that one of the lessons learned from Russia's aggression against Ukraine is the fact that it's turned into a technological war with the use of drones, with the use of anti-drone equipment, electronic warfare. And so Latvia, we are, because obviously we don't have a long tradition of defense industry and productions, but we're encouraging the young innovators in our country. The minister a week or so ago visited about half a dozen drone manufacturers of different types. Some are long-range drones, some are shorter range. Some of them are already sending drones to Ukraine. And similar to what Steve mentioned, I think what we're having to do from the governmental point of view is to look for innovative ways to do away with the heavy procurement rules that many governments have because of the urgency of the situation today.
Well, I think that message of urgency, and Congressman, I mean, this is going a bit into the shoulda, coulda, woulda, but should the Biden administration use the Defense Production Act very quickly when they understood that the need for support for Ukraine, as well as supplying our allies, was urgently needed? And I'm really going to ask all of you, because look, the Russian government is now on a war footing. They've totally turned their economy. I'm not suggesting we do that, but we're now facing a global alignment, and that's exactly what the supplemental is suggesting. We have to support Ukraine. We have to support Israel. We have to support Taiwan. This requires a different approach of political urgency and really a new commitment to providing those defense contracts. Is that even feasible?
Well, I think that has to be considered, because we know even if the money is approved and signed into law in the early part of next week, that doesn't mean that the weapons are there to defend Kharkiv next week. We need, if we cannot apply those dollars to get the weapons there quickly, the Defense Production Act definitely needs to be considered. I would say, particularly in view of the comments from our colleague from Latvia, that the Baltics have played such an important role here. They've done far more than their size would indicate, not only in getting assistance to Ukraine, but in coming here and urging us to overcome the obstruction in Washington. We had his neighbor, the Estonian defense minister, here this week. We had the Czech prime minister, and the Czechs, in addition to the Baltics, had their ammunition initiative trying to fill some of the gap that's there. This kind of transatlantic cooperation is really important. The other thing I would add is that I think the comments from Latvia indicate that the most expensive and most complex weapon is not always the best weapon for those in need. And the adaptability, adapting even commercial products to use drones in Ukraine, I think has been really important.
Steve, it's not just money, although the contracts are absolutely vital. It is supply chains, it's the human, the skills that we need. That's all contributing to some of the delays in defense production. But what does Boeing need to try to begin to meet these needs, and how do we need to adjust the requirements to fill that need?
You know, we talked a lot about the enablers. Congressman Doggett mentioned that investments that are being made to secure supply chain of critical materials. This is hugely important to have a dependable supply chain. The skilled labor, we're all going to have to work. This is a society-wide endeavor to improve the skills and the availability of skilled labor for these kind of sophisticated processes. The long pole in the tent for these new fabs for silicon chips is actually the workforce. It's not the bricks and mortar to build the building or the equipment. It's having the people with the real sophisticated manufacturing skills to fabricate these chips. But there's another place we have to push into, and as an American company, we fully acknowledge that, which is partnerships. We have to do this together with Europeans. And as we see Europe finally moving to a level of defense spending that is really a reversal of 30 years of decline, this is a hugely important moment for us to get the architecture right. And what we really need is a transatlantic defense industry. There's a lot of great companies in Europe. We're not talking about swallowing up Europe by any stretch of imagination. Our company works with Leonardo, we work with British Aerospace, we work with Saab, as I mentioned earlier, and we have a footprint all over Europe of engineers and researchers. The defense industry is going to have to match the level of interoperability that we strive for with our operational forces.
So I would like to propose that a transatlantic defense industry be a NATO summit deliverable. That's the type of boldness that I think we need. Ambassador, you have another problem. In addition to providing the important needs for Ukraine, Latvia, amongst many of our other northern and eastern NATO allies, have really cleared out your stocks. You need to replenish your own defense stocks. Help us understand how Latvia is looking at that modernization, the technology, the transatlantic defense industry, because some of our NATO allies, Estonia, Poland, because there's not the production from Europe and the United States, they've reached out to other allies. The Koreans are producing tanks for Poland. Even the Estonians are reaching out. There's an urgency. They need this production. But now, of course, we're bringing in a new piece of equipment for NATO interoperability, which is, of course, always challenging. But how are you thinking about your own defense replenishment?
Well, first of all, I think what we have done, and we've raised our defense budget to 3.1% for this year.
Yeah, 2% is so yesterday. We're talking
exactly
3% now.
And thank you, Congressman, for your comments about Ukraine, because last week our president signed an agreement with President Zelensky in which we also committed in the future to devote 0.2% of GDP to supporting Ukraine. It's a question of financing, but obviously, again, we have to look fairly creatively. And I must say that with the new approach that is being taken by the European Union to increase and to focus on the military industry, Latvia will start producing in collaboration with a Norwegian, Finnish company, Namo, and a French, Italian company, Nexta. and this is a joint project for the production of casings for ammunition, and this is starting from scratch. And obviously, for us, the question of the supply chain is very important. We, being a frontline state, want to, once again, and I think there's a realization in Europe that production has to also move geographically and not just focus on some of the big producers. And so I think we see that opportunities are available for that. And once again, because we're able to make fast decisions, we've set up also a national defense corporation, which is government-owned. This was set up in December last year, and that's going to be the interlocutor, the intermediary with industry. And so we're working very closely with the local Latvian industry, but also in a wider context, both European and transatlantic.
Well, I think we can't also forget there's going to be eventually great Ukrainian defense industrial capacity, something that we want to support. And I know Steve Boeing has 1,100 engineers in Ukraine, and making sure that they're part of this incredible new transatlantic defense industry. I'd like to turn to, it's going to be a more sobering conversation, and I want to say I am always about the optimism of now with this great news. Hopefully the supplemental passes Ukraine receives in days, not weeks. Absolutely urgently needed ammunition and certainly critically needed air defense. But there is a possibility that this delay has now caused some irreparable damage, and that Ukrainian forces are going to lose some strategic territory, which may increasingly focus our NATO partners' minds on the eastern flank of a new approach, what I will call Plan B. That our NATO allies are going to now start to require NATO to support them more concretely with more air defense, more air capabilities, should that, hopefully that scenario doesn't happen. Congressman Doggett, how would you recommend and encourage the administration to think about how we could support our allies should they call upon us if their security now becomes very challenged? Polish airspace and Romanian airspace has already been violated, that we need to start now thinking about enhancing and strengthening NATO's eastern flank. Sir.
Well, I think that the President affirmed very clearly when both of those incidents happened, our commitment that is unequivocal to the defense of all of our NATO allies. I think it's a matter of continuing to affirm that at every opportunity. And then it is a matter of continuing to have some American military presence and cooperation with each of those frontline states. As to your concern, which I certainly share, about the possibility of Russian advancements in Ukraine, as we go forward, there may be some setbacks, but they need to not come from the West or be the kind of obstruction and delay we've had so recently with this Ukraine aid. We need to be there whether the Ukrainians fall back before they move forward, in any event, to support them fully and not to lean on them to accept unacceptable conditions for an end to the conflict.
So, Ambassador, I'm going to turn to you because in some ways, this is not an original thought of Plan B. French President Macron actually started Plan B when he said, we may have to send forces into Ukraine in a desperate situation. Help us understand, in the worst case scenario, and I know this is hypothetical and I don't want this to happen, how would Latvia begin to respond? You've already now gone to conscription as of last year. What would you do in response in that worst case scenario? How would Latvia, would you start seeking more NATO US forces in support of Latvia's defense?
Well, can I say it's already happening? I think that we're already planning for Plan B. And this is part of the decision-making process that has been made by the alliance with the United States in the lead. The last two summits, the focus on collective defense, the core role of the alliance, ensuring that territory, which includes airspace, every inch of territory is defended from the first minute. So these are all the issues that I think the alliance is looking towards. The plans have been adopted by the alliance. Very important for Washington that these plans are now put into effect, that there are enough troops on the ground, and there's enough planning done to deal with the worst case scenario, and to ensure that by strong defense we do have this deterrence effect. Clearly, we've seen the last couple of weeks how crucial air defense is. When the attack by Iran against Israel took place, of course, our Ukrainian friends were saying, well, look, this is what, why is it that Ukrainians are having to die? Because they don't have those 3 levels of air defense that Israel has, and that was Israel was, of course, assisted by the United States, by the United Kingdom, by France. So at the same time, I think there are capability gaps within the alliance which are recognized, and they need to be addressed. This is especially important in the air defense. We've had, since we joined NATO, we've had a number of our allies that have been dealing with what's called air policing. So it's air policing of the NATO airspace over the Baltics, because we didn't have the facilities and the equipment to police our airspace from the moment we joined in 2004. So we've been having to rely on the solidarity of allies to deal with this air policing, but now it needs to be turning into air defense. And once again, capabilities, and we rely very much on the solidarity of what NATO is all about.
Well, just saying, a posture for air policing is very different to a posture of air defense. That's a very significant shift.
And let's not forget, just briefly, that with Sweden and Finland joining the alliance, I think for our region, this is very much a game changer.
Absolutely. So, Steve, I would argue the Biden administration's posture as we head into the NATO summit, and of course for 2024, is that hold the line. That the supplemental will support, Ukrainian defenses will hold, and then our production capacity increases by 2025, and then hopefully 2025 is a much more improved situation for the Ukrainian military. But in that Plan B scenario, potentially a backdrop for the NATO summit, how would you, if you were in government, how would you advise the administration on planning for that Plan B? What would you begin to do now to be, for NATO to be capable if that dreaded moment would happen?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So what you just described has been publicly enunciated by administration officials as U.S. policy. I think we have to be careful that we don't look at a triumph of hope over experience, though. Hold the line until 2025, and then what? Concerns me, and to this extent, Ambassador, my Plan B would probably go quite a bit farther. So we heard from Ambassador Smith the overview of what the summit's going to do. It's going to celebrate 75 years of alliance successes. It's going to talk about burden sharing and the successes there, or opportunity sharing, as Celeste Wallander called it, and the tremendous turnaround in European defense spending. And it's going to talk about Ukraine. And so that's great too. But yesterday at the George W. Bush Library, the Director of Central Intelligence, Bill Burns, gave a speech on the state of the war in Ukraine. And he made a very dire forecast of a possibility that by the end of 2024, Ukraine could lose this war. By the end of this year. And I know Director Burns, when he's talking about Ukraine loses this war, he means Ukraine doesn't exist anymore. And we have to think very much about this as a possibility. Now, it's not a certainty. This depends significantly on the resolve and stamina of the Ukrainians themselves, and I'm not one to discount them, certainly not again after what they've done since February of 2022. It depends upon the capabilities that the Russians retain, because we don't know exactly how much reserve they have to continue to fight this war. Of course, it depends upon our assistance. And above all, for the Ukrainians, for the Russians, and for the Americans, it depends upon political will. And we all know the struggle that is here. And so, if I look back on the war, we could trace failures back on what underpinned this war, with lots of failures to account for: the corruption in Ukraine, the failure to respond more affirmatively after the 2004 Orange Revolution, 2008 the failure to complete the invitation process of the Bucharest summit, 2014 the quick race to the Minsk II Accords instead of pushing back on the Russian invasion. There's only one party to blame for this war. That's Vladimir Putin, a ruthless dictator who's brutally invaded a peaceful neighbor. There's blame for only one place. But there are plenty of failures. And if I think about two that we really need to be careful to avoid, it's failure of imagination and it's failure of deterrence. And undeniably, as we approach this war, it was a failure of imagination. And when the Russians invaded, it was a failure of deterrence. So how do we change that? I think we need that robust Plan B right now. It includes some immediate term things we can do and some longer term things. In the failure of imagination, if the Russians break through the Ukrainian lines, we all need to understand what that means. Millions of refugees will be flowing into Poland and Hungary and Romania. If the Russians break through the Ukrainian lines, there's nothing to stop them between the Dnipro River and the Polish border. When those refugees start fleeing, we might see Balts and Poles begin to consider whether or not they can safely stay in their territories with a Russian army of 500,000 marching upon NATO's borders. We're going to have to consider mobilizing our forces. Already we see conscription in countries, economies going entirely to war footing, defense industries becoming the central productive element of countries, supply chains and economies and normal considerations thrown out the window. We cannot have a failure of imagination here. This is a possibility, and Bill Burns emphasized it yesterday. So what do we do? What would it take to deter? Of course, we have to do Plan A, the assistance to the Ukrainians. We have to do Plan A, the defense and deterrence strategy and the interlocking regional plans, and we have to fulfill those. The burden sharing as allies, we have to do all that. But I think we need to do more, and we need to do it urgently. And there's a few things I would do immediately, and there's a few that I would do soon. The immediate ones is I'd begin offering NATO cover and patrols for all shipping in the Black Sea by the Ukrainians in international waters. That's aerial assets and maritime assets. There is no cause for Russia to attack Ukrainian ships in the Black Sea, and we should be there to defend them in international waters. Second, Russians have fired missiles through NATO airspace. We should have air defense assets in the northwest corner of Poland, and in the northeast corner of Poland, and in the northeast corner of Romania, which coincidentally will cover the cities of Odessa and Lviv in a 360-degree air defense, which is 100% appropriate and justified based upon the fact that the Russians have actually fired munitions through NATO airspace, but also any missile fired at either of those two cities could end up hitting Romania or Poland in the blink of an eye. And so we need those defense assets. That will free the Ukrainians up, incidentally, to redeploy all of their air defense assets forward to defend other urgent targets closer to the front. Those are the things we need to do in the immediate term. In the longer term, we have to consider the possibilities of conscription. We have to consider the possibilities of forward deployment of forces in a more urgent basis. I've had two polls tell me, one in the government and one a foreign policy thinker, that if the Russians break through the Ukrainian lines, Poland is not going to wait for the Russians to get to the Polish border. Poland would much rather fight the Russians in Ukraine with Ukrainians by their side. This is a scenario that we cannot fail to imagine. And if we imagine this scenario, we understand it's a scenario we cannot fail to deter. The last thing I would do is I would give Ukraine an invitation to NATO membership. It's an accession process. It doesn't happen in July of this year. It begins in July of this year. That's a Plan B that we need to have. Now, I know what the plan is for the NATO summit. We're going to commit to the assistance, which is very important. We're going to commit to a process of bilateral security assurances, and we're going to move the assistance and training into NATO from the Ramstein group. And by the way, I am full of praise for what our administration, our president has done, and the European leaders. They've done great work. But by the time we get to the July summit, I think we're going to need to have a Plan B in our pocket, because if the worst case scenario happens, it's not going to be enough to celebrate 75 years of the summit or to talk about the successes of burden sharing, or for that matter, to talk about a plan for Ukraine that does not give them a seat at the table in NATO.
Steve, we need a plan A and we need a plan B, and that was a great articulation. We're going to keep working on that. But Congressman Doggett, you will forever be known as the person who gave Brussels Forum the good news. Now, you got to vote again tomorrow, but you gave us the good news that Plan A can be possible. So thank you so much. Keep voting. Keep Congress strong and bipartisan in its support for our allies. And please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for a very thought-provoking conversation.